Good afternoon, and welcome to TME Presents, the next evolution in streamlining NEPA. You read the article, now learn the rest of the story. I'm Daniel Wheatley, Associate Editor for the Military Engineer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. All attendees are in a listen-only mode for the presentation. You can submit questions for the presenters at any time by using the questions pane of your control panel. We will collect these and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please also submit any technical issues you may be encountering here as well. I would now like to introduce the authors of the article, Brian Boos, National Federal Environmental Planning Leader with AECOM, and Jennifer Warf, National DoD Environmental Planning Leader with AECOM. And now I'll turn it over to them for the presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. Get the slide deck up here momentarily. Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Brian Boos. I'm with AECOM, and for donating an hour of your time to listen to this topic on the National Environmental Policy Act and the digital NEPA renaissance that is happening around us and with us today. So with that, we'll launch the deck. Next slide, please. So this is NEPA. Why should I listen to this? Well, again, for the first time in 42 years, effective last week on the 16th of July, the President's Council on Environmental Quality published the first final major revision to the CEQ's NEPA implementing regulations in 42 years. NEPA is now a little bit over 50 years old, and that's probably older than several people on the call today. But in 42 years, the primary regulations that drive NEPA and what we do related to NEPA for federal proposed actions hasn't substantially or legally changed. So this presentation is about how we complete NEPA faster, better, and more efficiently in preparing easier to understand documents with improved stakeholder engagement, processes that are post-COVID-19 pandemic social distancing compliant, providing clearer data from which to make informed military decisions more quickly and accurately, while achieving mission requirements faster and achieving better environmental outcomes through use of better information. So that is the fundamental of this presentation and the tools that we're going to show you today. Next slide. So who are we? We're AECOM, hopefully moving the DoD's NEPA needle. And as Daniel introduced, Jen, you can just go through these slides. I'm Brian Boos. I run all things NEPA, Natural and Cultural Resources for AECOM that we do for the federal government. I've been doing this for my entire career for 32 years. A lot of documents, a lot of projects, every state and territory in the US, simultaneous work. I've seen lots of things, and not by any stretch have I seen everything, but I'm very excited about the changes that are happening around us now within the NEPA world. And with me is Jennifer Warf. Next slide. And Jen, do you want to say a few things about you?
Yes, sure. I was just unmuting myself. Yeah, good afternoon. This is Jen Warf. I serve as our AECOM's National Department of Defense Environmental Planning Lead. I have over 19 years of NEPA and natural resources experience with probably over 16 of those years providing services to the DoD nationwide. I've had the opportunity to work in all 50 states as well as Puerto Rico, and I am excited to be here today to share some of the innovative approaches that AECOM is taking to streamline and modernize NEPA for the DoD.
Okay, so we are truly passionate about this, and hopefully our passion leads to innovation and doing things better. But we're passionate about conducting environmental impact analyses that are meaningful, involve the public in a robust way like they're supposed to, and most importantly, result in better, faster decision-making with improved environmental outcomes while attaining the agency, and in this case, the military's mission. Those are the objectives of NEPA. They've always been the objectives of NEPA since it was signed into law in 1970. Next slide. So what will we cover today? We will cover a very brief history of NEPA, 50 years in 5 minutes, give or take. We'll discuss what is changing right now as we speak. We will identify and discuss what are digital NEPA and virtual public meetings and why they're important to the DoD's mission. We'll show you examples of the nation's first ever digital EIS that AECOM is preparing for the Baltimore District Army Corps of Engineers. And then we'll demonstrate another software tool that we've applied to conduct virtual public comment meetings in a social distancing environment. This was for the Savannah District. And then we'll have Q's and A's. The photos to the right, those of you familiar with NEPA have seen them, might not know all of the history. Clearly, the top one is Richard Nixon signing NEPA into law on New Year's Day, 1970. Yes, he was working New Year's Day, 1970, signing a major piece of legislation. Lower left is the Santa Barbara oil spill in 1968, one of the environmental catastrophes that really sped up the passage of NEPA. And then in the lower right is a photo that several of you may know. That is the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, on fire. A lot of people think that photo is from June 22nd, 1969, which was the last time the Cuyahoga River caught fire. Wasn't the first time, it was actually the 13th time, lucky number 13. The Cuyahoga River had caught fire for the first time in 1868, 101 years earlier. Caught fire 12 more times after that, and that photo that you see there is not from 1969. That photo is from 1952, which was a much larger fire. The fire in 1969 only lasted about half an hour and nobody took a picture of it. But that was the photo that Time magazine, not TME, but Time magazine used in their article about the fire in 1969. That fire, as many of you know, was one of the key environmental catastrophes that triggered the development of the EPA, the passage of the Clean Water Act, and passage of NEPA. Next slide. So, history of NEPA, 50 years in 5 minutes. I'll try to hit it. Next slide. So, in pictures, I'm a Mopar guy. I love Chrysler products, muscle cars, 1970 Plymouth Hemi Superbird, no air conditioning, state-of-the-art 1970 when NEPA was passed into law. Today, Meekums or eBay, it runs a little bit north of $750,000. So it's still a classic. Middle picture, best photo that we could find, but effectively what happened to the little yellow car over 50 years, it got loaded down with a lot of stuff, and it wasn't quite as efficient as it once was and was intended to be. And then ultimately what I think we all hope we'll achieve is the bullet train. Definitely with air conditioning, state-of-the-art 2020, and much better, faster, and more comfortable. Next slide. So NEPA, four-letter word for the DoD. NEPA, as written in the law, was never intended to be an onerous action stopping litigation tool. It was intended to be a process. it evolved. Over 50 years, it evolved from roughly 3,200 word law written when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong, also from Cleveland. And by the way, Jen and I are also from Cleveland, so there's a lot of Cleveland ties in NEPA, set foot on the moon. So it was a while ago, but the three basics of NEPA were and have always been and remain until today, for the federal government to obtain and consider stakeholder input into their decision-making process, to consider the environmental impacts of their proposed action and alternative courses of action, and identify possible methods to reduce adverse environmental effects, and then to document the process. NEPA was never intended to dictate an outcome. It outlined a process. Unfortunately, it's changed along the way. Next slide. These are the three laws, regulations. Number 2 is now OBE by the 16 July 2020 edition. So that slide needs updated. We also have agency-specific NEPA regulations that I think most of you are familiar with. And of course, case law that has come about over the last 50 years. Next slide. CEQ in 1978 and again in 2020, its language is still there as of last week in the final, has directed us to foster better, more informed decisions, not write better documents. Actions are what's important. We were always supposed to have been identifying and eliminating from analysis those issues, those resources that weren't significant to the action, and focusing on environmental consequences that could be of significance, not writing kitchen sink NEPA documents. Next slide. So what happened in 42 years? Well, lots happened, and a lot of it not necessarily for the better. A lot of inconsistencies between different federal agencies, NEPA implementing regulations in terms of process nuances, a tendency to prepare kitchen sink, injunctophobic, or bulletproof NEPA documents to dissuade lawsuits, or if challenged, to win, even though the federal government generally wins about 80% or more of the cases where they're sued under the Administrative Procedure Act for NEPA violations. We've seen many new and additional environmental laws, lots of litigation, lots of onerous, confusing, strange processes, and overall the perception that NEPA is the Achilles heel of the federal government, of new and different things the federal government does. It's the way to stop the government, and that's never what NEPA was intended to be. Next slide. So all of those things resulted in longer documents, which took more time to prepare and, of course, cost more. Again, evolution of strange, inconsistent, and often onerous agency-specific NEPA practices. And I've worked for virtually every federal agency, and we're working for many federal agencies now, and I'm surprised on a weekly basis about things that come up still. We've moved away from NEPA fundamentals, and ultimately we're not necessarily improving stakeholder engagement, improving decision-making through better information, or achieving better environmental outcomes. So we've done all these things, and we haven't necessarily achieved the primary objective that we started to try to achieve, which is problematic. Next slide. So in 2009, the Stimulus Act, the ARRA, was signed into law and implemented, and had a little section, 1609 Charlie, that required the projects to be shovel ready and to prove to CEQ that their NEPA box had been checked, which caused CEQ to track via hundreds of pages of 2-point fonts, huge 11 by 17 Excel spreadsheets of all stimulus projects and their NEPA compliance. And what CEQ found is, wow, there are huge differences between how agencies perform NEPA. including but not limited to the types and numbers of categorical exclusions each agency had. Next slide. So in 2010, as a result, and this was under Obama, from 2010 to 2014, CEQ issued a number of memoranda to federal agencies that are listed there. I think over the last 40 years, CEQ has put out 30 memoranda to federal agencies. Those are just some of them, but instructing agencies to basically get back to NEPA basics and CEQ basics that were articulated in 1978. Next slide. That continued under the Trump administration with those executive orders, the FAST Act, FAST 41. Department of Interior came out with Directive 3355 with timelines and page limits for NEPA documents. Many other publications, guidances, regulations related to streamlining NEPA, an effort to streamline NEPA. Next slide. So what is current NEPA or not so current? Well, those are the 3 steps that we're still supposed to be doing at the top. But again, in 50 years, documents got longer. We still use newspaper ads to publish. I haven't read a newspaper in I don't know how long. We conduct in-person public meetings in high school gymnasiums. We make little use of the internet, of social media, modern technology like drones or GIS-based analytical tools. Effectively, we do NEPA the way we've always done NEPA, which isn't necessarily the best way. But we produce these long documents that few people read and take forever to go through the review process, which results in, again, increased costs, scope, and schedule, and ultimately decreased understanding and value, which deviates from the NEPA fundamentals. Next slide. So what are the results of quote unquote bad behavior? And CEQ published this back in December of 2018. It was based on a study of, I think about 1,500 EISs that were completed between 2010 and 2017. And overall findings were average EIS, environmental impact statement, cost $2.5 million. Average amount of time to prepare, 4.5 years from the notice of intent to the record of decision. And if you think about it, if someone gave birth 4.5 years later, your child's ready to enter kindergarten. That's how long it takes. And while the EIS bodies have averaged about 600 to 700 pages, with appendices, they've averaged 1,600 pages. 1,600 pages. Now, if you would take the Bible, Old and New Testament, and convert that to standard 12-point font, space and a half, margins like we use in NEPA documents, the Bible would be 1,200 pages, shorter than an average EIS. So that therefore begs the question, are we in producing these expensive, time-consuming, long documents, are we improving decision-making? Are we improving public involvement and understanding and or are we achieving better environmental outcomes? I would argue that we're not. Next slide. So it was time for a course correction, and right now we are in the midst of that course correction with the publication of CEQ's final NEPA implementing regs last week. And with that, I think, Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you. Yes? That's the same slide. I love it so much I put it in twice.
All right, so what have we seen in the past year or so? Well, we've seen a consistent federal direction to provide better environmental outcomes faster. We just saw last week CEQ issue a substantial revision to the NEPA implementing regulations for the first time in over 40 years. Further, we've seen a number of federal agencies issue changes to their implementing regulations, as well as issue NEPA streamlining memoranda, outlining new guidelines and policy changes. For example, the Department of Navy revised their NEPA implementing regulations, and these were codified in 32 CFR 775 earlier this year in January. These revised regulations placed an emphasis on streamlining, as well as more flexibility to use categorical exclusions. We saw the U.S. Army issue new proposed NEPA regulations for public review in March, which included a greater use of programmatic documents to tier off of, and an increase from 52 to 74 available Army CADXs. We've also seen unforeseen and uncontrollable events also begin to shape how we implement public outreach. We've had to ask ourselves, how do we make our documents accessible when the typical venues, such as libraries, are closed? How do we conduct public meetings to solicit comments on our draft EIS if in-person meetings are not feasible due to social distancing requirements? So all of these questions have really brought to the forefront how important it is for NEPA process to modernize. And then finally, we've also seen in response to COVID-19, the President issue Executive Order 13927, which more or less sets forth that agencies should take all appropriate steps to use their lawful emergency authorities to allow for expedited government decision-making and in turn facilitate the nation's economic recovery. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about the new final CEQ regulations. As you're aware, the draft revisions to the CEQ NEPA implementing regulations were released earlier this year in January for public review and comment. They received approximately 1.1 million comments during the 60-day public comment period. And then we saw the final CEQ regulations announced last Wednesday afternoon and then published on Thursday, July 16th. There's a couple links here on this slide, a link to the Federal Register for the full regulations, as well as some additional data. And I guess I just point out from the additional data standpoint, I really found the redline version to be particularly helpful in zeroing in on specific changes from the 1978 version to this new version. All right, so what are some of the key takeaways from the final CEQ revisions? Well, one of the first things that stands out is the proposed regulations are quite a bit shorter in length. They went from 47 pages to 20 pages. In addition to adding new terms, removing terms such as indirect and cumulative effects, and also clarifying a number of existing terms, they were reorganized substantially. They seek to simplify and accelerate the NEPA process, one, by placing presumptive page and time limits on NEPA documents, also by providing more flexibility in the use of CADXs, and then finally by reinforcing that agencies should reduce paperwork and delays, focus on relevant significant issues, and ensure key NEPA staff and resources are dedicated and available to a project. They also seek to modernize the NEPA process by directing agencies to post NEPA-related materials on websites, by requiring the ability for electronic public comments, and also by allowing for the use of modern technologies to replace paper copy documents and support public outreach. So what does this ultimately mean for the DoD? Well, it means less paper, shorter documents, and the need to complete the process quicker. You can expect more focused, resource-specific NEPA analyses. You can expect that there is a need to get your proposed action well-defined well in advance of NEPA, and also the need for increased and early internal and external scoping. And then ultimately, finally, the reliance on innovative technologies more and more. This is where AECOM sees the potential for some exciting opportunities, and we look forward to showing you here in a few moments some of the initial steps AECOM has been taking in close coordination with the DoD. Back to you, Brian.
Very good. Okay, so these are some methods in this short section that AECOM used while all the memoranda were being issued and before the final CEQ implementing regulations came out. And not so surprising, I guess, a lot of the methods have now been codified in the final regulations. So the next slide just lists a few of those that we were using to try to meet the presumptive page and time limits early on. Machine has stopped making noise. Jen, can you flip the slide, please? Well, there we go. So between 2018 and 2020, we were able to complete EISs in under 2 years and under the 300-page mark, in a couple cases under the 150-page mark, by using heavy lifting up front. And even in the new CEQ regulations, CEQ is encouraging us, federal agencies, consultants, to lift a lot up front, do a lot of upfront homework in terms of understanding and defining the proposed action and its alternatives, understanding and defining potential for significant effects and potential for no effects, so that we can focus our analysis to build a strong description of proposed action and alternatives from which to conduct the analysis. Work internally within the federal agency, and then a across stakeholders to understand what those issues significant to the action are early in the process so you can focus on them. Enforcing accountability timelines and strong planning. Those of you familiar with transportation, NEPA and FAST Act and FAST 41 and the permitting dashboard, effectively tracking and holding accountable everyone involved each step of the way along aggressive timelines. Reducing and consolidating steps as much as possible. I think gone are the days where we have preliminary draft, internal draft, camera check, copy drafts, Rev 1, 2, 3 through 185. I think we have to be clear, we have to be accurate, we have to be precise, we have to be coordinated and minimize the number of internal drafts that we generate, and each draft has to be as high quality as possible. Limiting pages, limiting time, preparing focused NEPA documents, and addressing areas of controversy early and often, and make sure that you address those environmental issues that are significant to the action. That's the purpose of NEPA. The general consensus is, and now is codified into law, that shorter, clearer, and more analytic documents are better. Told to do that now, and we're all going to have to figure it out to comply with the new regulation. Next slide. So what do we do to answer the ask that came out of the new regulation with hard time limits, hard page limits, and the new requirements that really aren't that new? They're actually a parroting and a concise representation of what we were told in 1978. So moving from now into the future, we're moving from paper to web-based platform and the internet. Next slide. We're moving from high school gymnasiums and elementary school gymnasiums to the internet and virtual public meetings on websites. Next slide. So just as one of many citations from the new CEQ implementing regs, 1507.4 is as was written in the draft. It changed, I don't think at all, but CEQ identifies that electronic means, methods, digital tools should be used to render NEPA more efficient, more accessible. There are a lot of references. The second primary bullet down identifies more references to electronic public engagement and information sharing. And definitely CEQ is urging us to use more electronic methods to share information. Next slide. So as Daniel noted early on, we did publish on this topic back in January, February. We are integrating current technologies into NEPA to comply with the new CEQ implementing regs and effectively return back to basics. We're achieving the three fundamental objectives that we were told to achieve in 1970 and again in 1978. So what is it? Next slide. And I like that picture. That woman's very happy. Digital NEPA. It effectively moves NEPA into the modern age and comports with modern streamlining initiatives. Uses modern technology, drones, GIS, websites, the internet, social media, virtual meetings, hyperlinks to other information instead of regurgitating pages and pages of text about the Endangered Species Act or the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. You can simply link to the federal agency's website and the reviewer can get all the information they ever wanted to know about those regulations. It also has a short companion printed document that can stand alone, still required because CEQ was clear and we're all familiar with the issue of stakeholders that don't have internet access or broadband capability and the need to be Section 508 of the American with Disabilities Act compliant. So right now we're not moving away entirely from a printed document, but we're making greater use of information portrayal within the digital realm. Overall, this results in better, faster, and more efficient processes and improves stakeholder and decision maker understanding and engagement with the analysis. It's highly visual, it's highly navigable. The experience through a website, vice a written document can be tailored by the user for the user as they're using it. So they can obtain and review as much detailed information or as little as they wish on each topic, and can drill almost in an unlimited way into information related to the analysis. Our goal and our thought and our experience so far is that through this enhanced understanding and use of more visual imagery, it improves understanding and ultimately results in better outcomes through the better understanding. Because decision makers actually can see what the outcomes would be and how alternatives can be implemented to improve those outcomes. And also it meets federal directives to shorten documents and timelines. Through the digital method, review timelines are significantly shortened because of the platform being more interactive. It's a lot easier to go through a website and navigate at your own pace the information you want to see than to drill through 1,600 pages of text. Next slide. So prove it. So here we go. Next slide. AECOM is preparing the U.S. first ever digital EIS. The contracting agency is the Baltimore District Army Corps of Engineers. The action proponent is the U.S. Department of Treasury, and specifically the Bureau of Engraving and Printing within the Department of Treasury. That agency is responsible for printing our paper currency. They don't make coins. That's the job of the U.S. Mint. The proposed action is the construction and operation of a new proposed currency production facility at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Beltsville Agricultural Research Center in Beltsville, Prince George's County, Maryland, within the National Capital Region around Washington, D.C. A brief history is that the Department of Treasury, BEP, has been using the same facility in Washington, D.C. for over 100 years. It's antiquated, it's unsafe, it doesn't meet modern requirements for printing our currency or doing the other functions of their mission, and they need a new facility. BEP did build a small currency production facility in Texas in 1990. That was the only other new facility they built in their 100+ year history, and that facility isn't of sufficient capacity. And for various other reasons, the facility needs to be within the National Capital Region. So with that intro, we will show a short 10-minute video of the digital EIS website. By no means will it cover everything, but it'll give you a taste of what a digital EIS looks like. So with that, Daniel, if you could roll the video, please.
AECOM is pleased to present what we believe to be the nation's first ever digital EIS. Working with the Baltimore District and the Department of Treasury and built on AECOM's proprietary software, we have developed this digital EIS. We are currently on the landing page. It identifies high-level data, provides a photograph of the site as it is today, and the proposed action. Click on the Start button and it takes the reader to the abstract. They will note that the document is organized in the same way a traditional EIS is organized. Throughout the website, there are links to access more information about specific resources or data. The reader can click on any of the links and it will take them to additional web-based information inside and outside of the digital EIS platform. The executive summary appears as it does in the traditional written document. It has purpose and need, description of the proposed action, alternative screening process, major conclusions of the impact analysis, etc. When you click on the Impact Comparison Matrix link in the Impact Analysis, the matrix will pop up for the reader to compare the differences in the preferred action alternative and the no action alternative. Also, in the executive summary, there is a summary of the mitigation measures at a very high level so the essence of the document can be rapidly understood. Moving into the purpose and need, the reader can scroll through and notice that the text is very short, precise, and to the point. All relevant elements, including links to additional information, such as the scoping report, is easily accessible. Each section has a link at the bottom that says, "Do you want more information?" and the link will take you to the traditional formatted written text. In the Proposed Action Alternatives section, the reader will notice that the map extent and data on the left side of the screen changes as they scroll through the text on the right side. Some of the more innovative and user-friendly functionality of the site is the ability to include video, images, and drone images, as well as data analytics. In the description of proposed action, there is a drone video that shows the site as it currently exists today. The reader can click on the innovative fly-around video and get an idea of what the proposed site will look like. This was built by overlaying the concept design over the existing conditions. Images and videos like this are instrumental in helping the decision makers and stakeholders understand what is being proposed, what it will look like, and how the site will change if it is implemented. There is another video that shows the construction sequence. It shows the reader the phases of construction from the initial groundbreaking through the various construction phases during the 5-year construction plan. As the reader clicks through the various portions of the EIS, they will see the alternatives considered but dismissed, and there are links to find out more about each alternative. Next is the alternatives retained for detailed analysis, and then the alternatives impact comparison matrix that was shown before. Moving into the resource analysis area, there is an introduction for the section with internal links to each of the resource areas we considered, resources that were eliminated from further consideration, and the levels of impact. When you toggle through each resource area, it zooms into the region of influence for that area and it shows the regulations, existing conditions, significant criteria that apply to the analysis, and then the potential effects of the considered alternatives. Mitigation measures are summarized here. If the reader wants more detailed information, the link to the text and technical memorandum are at the bottom of each section. Visual resources is an area of concern. For this proposed action, we have put in links that show the present conditions and what it will look like with the addition of the facility, so the reader can see the current conditions and what it will look like with the proposed concept design. The digital EIS is supported by a traditional written document that is 156 pages cover to cover, as well as resource area and technical memoranda, which collectively total 300 pages. All of the information is tied together within this platform, but the written documents do stand alone and are legally sufficient. They are Section 508 of the ADA compliant. The documents are available for those without broadband connectivity or internet access, so the environmental justice communities are not overlooked as part of the NEPA process. In the cumulative effects section, the reader can see the past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. The reader can click and see the conclusions and other related disclosures for each site. The multimedia section includes the before and after sliders. This is a view from the highway. You can see the structure here in the distance. This slider is from the Beltsville Agricultural Research Facility. It shows what the facility will look like after it is constructed based on the current concept design. This section also includes all multimedia images used throughout the digital EIS platform. As the reader scrolls, the map moves to show the approximate location of the images. The images help the reader to see what the existing facilities and resources look like, what the condition is, etc. The reader can scroll around the interactive map and click on the various points to pull up information and the images. The final section of the digital EIS is the interactive maps. The reader can click on the different sections to turn layers on and off and build their own map with the data that interests them. Multiple data layers can be shown at once in this section. We hope you enjoyed this quick overview of the tool that is going to revolutionize the way we conduct NEPA analysis in the U.S. Preparing the digital EIS does not add time to the process, and we believe it will largely speed up the process by facilitating reviews. Reviewers can look at the website instead of a 3,000-page document. This also allows us to meet the presumptive time and page limits that the President's Council on Environmental Quality is proposing. As noted, this digital platform is supported by a 156-page written standalone traditional EIS. We are showing that a shortened EIS can be written. We appreciate your time and look forward to any comments or questions you have. Thank you.
Very good. Jen, do you want to launch into the virtual piece? Jen, are you muted?
Oh, apologies. I didn't realize the showing is unmuted. All right, try this again. Daniel, you can probably launch the video here shortly, but I'll do a quick intro first. All right, so the next tool we'll be showing is the AECOM's new public consultation tool. We're going to be showing you a video, and a number of projects are utilizing this platform this year for AECOM, but the Army is the first to utilize the new virtual public meeting tool for the DoD. This tool was specifically used for the U.S. Army's draft EIS for the Fort Benning Heavy Off-Road Mountain Maneuver Training Area, or the HOMTA. The site is maintained on a secure AECOM website, and it went live on May 29th, concurrent with the notice of availability getting published. It was publicly accessible for 45 days during the public comment period for the draft EIS, and it just recently ended here in mid-July. So with that, I'm going to let Daniel play the video that walks you through the components of this new virtual AECOM tool. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the U.S. Army's virtual public meeting for the Fort Benning HOMTA Draft EIS. This landing page provides some information on the materials that can be found within this site, provides some information on how to submit a comment. As you move through, it provides instructions on how to actually use this site and navigate it, contact information if you run into any issues or you want to request some printed copies of the materials. And also, this is where there will be some additional information on the public meeting announcement and how to attend that. So as you can see, as you enter the space, it looks very similar to your typical public meeting. You've got fact sheets and you've got posters kind of all throughout the space. And I'm just going to rotate here, clicking and dragging with my mouse. What's great about it is you can actually move up and down and get the full view of the room, just as if you were in the room itself. So I'm just going to scroll through here so you get the full view of the room. You'll see here that we have a comment station. And then here we are, we're back to the beginning. So let's start here at the beginning. I'm going to click on the first welcome poster. What you can do here is you click on the icon, and then you can click directly on the poster to get a zoomed in image of it. There's options up here where you can download the PDF of the poster or even print it directly from your computer here. What's great is we've also linked up all of the posters together. So if you click on one of the posters, you can access all of them concurrently and review them. Of course, if you want to access them all separately, you can do that as well. So let's move back here to the comment station. As I mentioned, this area provides an opportunity to submit a comment directly on the website, or you can go old school and you can actually download a comment form and you can email your comment form, or you can send it via regular mail. To the right here with this screen, there is a video here. This video was pulled together by the Army to provide the public with a little bit more information on what HOMTA training would entail. So let me just click on this really briefly here. And then let's move here to this other screen here to the right. This is actually where we'll have the public meeting announcement information located here. And this is actually where you would access the public meeting as well on the day and time of it. This is currently just a placeholder with a Zoom audio and video platform here embedded. For this particular public meeting, once it goes live, the Zoom function will have a different platform in here because the DoD has had some issues with Zoom recently from security standpoint. But once this goes live again, this will show specifically the information for that public meeting. So let's go here to the center of the screen, again to the table. So similar to other public meetings, you would see fact sheets. So you can click on each fact sheet similar to the posters, and I'll click on this here. And again, you can download them or you can print them from here. And you can also go and look at all of the fact sheets together. We have them linked similarly as we did with the posters. But of course, again, you can click on each fact sheet separately if you would prefer. And then finally, to the right here, we have the draft EIS, and you can download a full copy of that EIS if you so choose to. So before I close this virtual tool, I wanted to point out that the features within this virtual meeting room are completely customizable. So if you want to change the number of screens, or you want to change the location of the screens, or you maybe don't want as many posters, you can adjust this based on the needs of your project or your stakeholders. There are other functions that can be added that I have not shown you today within this particular website. You can add chat functions, you can add login functions, or you can even add survey monkeys if you want to get input on specific content or issues related to your project. So I want to thank you for taking the time to tour AECOM's new public consultation tool. We are truly excited about its ability to digitally bring the public consultation and meeting process to our project stakeholders, particularly during a time where in-person gatherings are rather limited, and in turn modernize the NEPA process. So thank you.
Very good. So this is Brian again. So a couple pieces that weren't in those videos is one, for the digital EIS, I'm going away off slide for a minute here. For the digital EIS, it's a particularly powerful tool for larger federal installations or federal land holdings because the information within the digital platform is secure on a website. Access can be controlled strictly, and it can serve as a building block or used for future NEPA documents. So it's not lost. It remains on the shelf, ready to be used for the next NEPA document with updates to the affected environment portion. So there's a lot of power in the digital EIS aside from just a nice presentation and understanding tool. On the virtual public meeting, a video that Jen showed, that video was made before the site was launched, so hence had Zoom in it. We actually used AT&T because Army uses AT&T. That 45-day public review period closed last week. We did receive comments. We received over 1,000 hits. I think it was like 1,200 hits on the website over the 45 days. We're able to track all the hits and the demographics associated with the hits, which is a nice feature. The comments we received were all positive. Surprisingly, we didn't receive one negative comment about the NEPA process, the proposed action. The comments were all positive about the website because the stakeholders had the ability over the entire 45-day period to access the website within that 45-day window at their leisure to review the material at the depth they wanted to. They were able to go through the information and answer their questions, apparently. And this is compared to a scoping meeting that I think we received over 300 comments on the proposed action during scoping. So it wasn't for a lack of attention or potential controversy, but it was the way that the data were provided to the stakeholders to review. So definitely a lot of power in modern tools. So to review and close before Q's and A's, digital NEPA, better, faster, shorter, and more efficient. It achieves the goals that we were told to achieve in 1970, 1978, and again in 2020. It does it in a way using modern technology to make it better. No more 1,600-page documents that few people read or want to read or understand. Information is conveyed clearly and understandably, and we meet the original spirit and intent of NEPA. Not better documents, but ultimately better decisions and excellent action. So with that, I think the slide deck is over. Oh, I had to throw the car up one more time, sorry. Still love the car, but I think we're getting into the bullet train. Now we'll turn it back over to Daniel for Q's and A's. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, Brian and Jen, for this presentation. So just want to remind all the attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in to the questions pane. we'll be looking through there and asking some to Brian and Jen right here before we wrap up. So let's start. Just 1 minute. All right. So let's just start with, can you explain about how digital NEPA saves time and money? It seems like, this is a little bit, like you're doing a little bit more work, not less, preparing a written document and also a website version. So, what's your experience with that, as this is actually a cost saving and time saving measure?
Okay, great question, and Jen, I'll take that one, I think, and please supplement if I speak or don't hit all the points. So logically, it looks like it could be more work. As the 10-minute video showed or talked about, there are 300 pages of technical memoranda related to the environmental amenities that are significant to the action. The science still has to be there, and the document still has to be there for people without broadband connectivity. But the science will always be there. The science has to be behind NEPA. But that was 300 pages worth of document, which then was distilled into a 156-page EIS cover to cover. Again, a very concise document, which boiled down the information from the tech memos one level into a digital or into a written EIS. And then that was double distilled into the digital EIS platform. As noted, I'm from Ohio, and it's like making maple syrup to me. You take sap, you boil down the sap, and you get down to the sugar, and that's what the digital EIS is. The science is behind it, the data is behind it. But ultimately, the presentation of the information are those key nuggets that help inform and educate the stakeholders and the decision makers about the things that we're supposed to be informing them about and allowing them to decide upon. The information is not in addition, it's the same information, it's just distilled down. So the amount of effort is not substantial. There's not a lot of additional effort, and the time savings and the cost savings really comes into play by speeding reviews, speeding understanding, reducing schedules, and reducing the number of iterations by having a more interactive, understandable platform. Really, in the 3 decades I've been doing this, where we lose the time and the cost is numerous review cycles, producing hugely long documents that take forever to review and forever to go through and edit. This makes it a lot simpler, cleaner, cheaper, faster. I think that would be my piece on this. Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of reiterate some of what you said, just the fact that everything is distilled down so that people can really focus on the true issues. What are the resource specific concerns? It allows them to actually drill into their concerns and look at things firsthand and spend as much time as they want on it, which really kind of enhances the reviews. And then ultimately you're going to get less comments, which is just going to expedite the process.
All right, thank you. Another question here. Sounds like we got a couple of questions kind of along the same lines here. Was about, you touched on this a little bit during the presentation of environmental justice and access to those without broadband access or other computer access, so they can fully engage in the NEPA process. So how are you ensuring folks are not left out? What are some best practices to engage with those without this type of access?
Okay, I'll take a shot at that first. Unfortunately, building a better mousetrap to convey to a larger audience using digital technologies and the internet is great, but we haven't cracked, no one to my knowledge has cracked the code on how to get digital information to non-broadband, non-internet stakeholders. We've had some projects where we issued tablets, we had set up public rooms where people could come in and view the documents online. It's a bit cumbersome. It's a workaround, but the traditional written document, the old school method of publishing documents and sending documents to folks, or CDs to folks, or memory sticks to folks, is still being used. I do know, before I turn it over to Jen, that while the digital EIS website, because of the amount of information that it has on it, doesn't work well on a mobile device or a tablet. It does work on a tablet. It doesn't work on an iPhone or an Android. The public comment meeting tool does. The public comment meeting tool is accessible to any internet-enabled device, iPhone, Android, tablet, PC, laptop, whatever. So because of the less data that it has. Jen, anything else?
Yeah, I think you really covered that well. I think if anybody has suggestions on how we can make it more accessible, I think we're all ears. But I mean, as of now, we still prepared the traditional legally sufficient document in tandem with the digital EIS to ensure that EJ communities were able to participate fully.
Great, thank you guys. Here's another question about some of the drilling a little bit deeper into the time and the cost effective methodology in here. For your USACE Baltimore project, what were some of the primary time savings that you saw here? And I'm kind of rolling in another question that I saw here about like a reduced amount of labor hours on the electronic projects. If there's a specific percentage that you've seen overall through the digital NEPA process, just a little bit more specifics about that. If you could, you got any specifics you can share?
Okay, so it's largely a trade-off. Let's say on labor hours, labor is still there. The science is still there and still needs to be done. The information dissemination, both in the hard copy for non-broadband audiences and the digital piece, still required. The savings are in the ODCs for the virtual public meetings, not creating the posters, not traveling to public meeting venues and staying in hotels and absorbing airfare and rental cars. So the ODCs, the other direct costs, are saved. From over the life of the project, the labor hour reduction, both on the side of the consultant and the government, are achieved because of more streamlined reviews and less review cycles. So the savings is through an hour reduction over a period of time, vice an hour reduction to conduct the analyses in and of themselves, if that makes sense. Jen, maybe you can say it better than I just did.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective too, as this kind of evolves and people get more comfortable with the idea of having things more digitally, ideally, maybe we're walking away from that traditional EIS document and we're moving more digitally. So there, in the long term, I could see some cost savings there as this overall approach evolves.
And truth be told, in some cases, you flying drones and collecting those pieces of data and digitizing data will add some costs, in fact, but the costs that are added are offset by the improvement in the decision making and ultimately better actions, better decisions, and better outcomes. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. We're looking to improve the overall process in terms of its understanding, its level of engagement across all stakeholders, and the amount of time by truly focusing on a pure cost perspective, but there will be cost efficiencies, again, because of the reduction of time in the effort.
All right, thank you guys. I think we have time for one more question, and I know that there are, we got a lot in the questions pane here, so if we don't get to yours, I do apologize. I think Brian and Jen, if you guys are available, you could share some information about how to contact you after the presentation if there's any follow-up questions.
Absolutely.
But one last question here. There's a lot of questions about some of the specifics of the digital EIS and its hosting and some of the technical details on the coding and the website. So if you could just answer questions about, are you hosting this on the government or the contractor website? What's the sort of review process for like the code, and how are you addressing like software or other sorts of the security vulnerabilities with the digital EIS platform?
Okay, I'll hit that quickly, and I am not an IT guy. So from where the website sits on a secure US-based AECOM controlled server. So that's where the website sits. We control access to the website and can open it up for public use and lock it down. It runs through a two-factor authentication to get onto the website, so government reviewers can access the information. And the software itself is not off-the-shelf software. It's purpose-built by AECOM. So we own the software that runs the program. And Jen's more techie than I am, so she'll probably correct what I just said.
No, you got it accurately. I don't really have too much more to add from a coding standpoint.
But if someone wants more information on the nuts and bolts, we will be happy to connect you to our webmaster wizards that can share all that good stuff.
Right, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. So I'm going to, I think that is about all the time that we have for today. Unfortunately, I know that we haven't gotten to everybody's questions in here, so do feel free to reach out to Brian and Jen if you have follow-up questions about anything from the presentation today. But other than that, thank you everybody for coming out today. Thank you especially to our presenters, Brian and Jen with AECOM, for your presentation. And it's just to say, if you are interested in submitting an article for the military engineer, you can visit our website. It'll have our editorial calendar and guidelines on the submission process. And then after you leave the webinar today, there'll be a brief survey about how the presentation, any comments or feedback that you'd like to give. We do greatly appreciate any and all comments from you. So on behalf of SAME, the military engineer, and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all.
Thank you.